All right, beef Wellington. This is a classic recipe. We're gonna do our take on it, our riff on it. Our take on it, we use a domestic wagyu. So the reason why we use this is because it has a little less fat content than a typical Japanese wagyu. Beef marbling scale, BMS, Japanese wagyu, typically 10 to 12 in that area. This is around 8 or 9. So it's a little bit leaner. It still has some of that nice marbling from a traditional wagyu, but it helps with the Wellington process so that there's not so much fat and there's not so much moisture from, say, like a grass-fed beef. So the first part of this is portioning the beef. You can see we dry age the beef. We inoculate it with a spore. So typically with dry aging, you can kind of do it two ways. You can dry age it just in a regular refrigerator, and kind of over time, if you dry it off, pat it down, eventually you'll get some dry aged beef. For us, we prefer the process that for us yields the best dry aged beef. That's inoculating it with a spore. That's putting it in a dry ager that has humidity for about 75 to 85% humidity. And it allows it to slowly dry out, so it concentrates that flavor, breaks down some of the sinew that's inside of the beef. So even with grass-fed beef, you get, for us, that's a really traditional flavor. It's got the flavor of grass. It's got the flavor how beef to me should actually taste. With this, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of that wagyu that has that really rich fat and that grass-fed, nice texture, nice flavor. So when this concentrates, you get the best of both worlds. And the first thing we're going to do is start portioning it. Okay, so here you can see we cut it open. We cut some of that dry age off. You can see the marbling here. So you can see the balance of meat and fat. So it is pretty fatty. This is the strip loin, so a New York style steak. And with all this fat cap on, we'll remove that too. So with dry aging, you get this dark outer piece. It's really intense. We don't typically use it unless we're rendering it for fat. So all this fat, all this stuff, we'll grind it in a meat grinder, and then we will slowly render it, and we'll use some of that fat to dress different preparations of beef. For this, we won't put any additional fat. When you have too much liquid, it doesn't always do the best thing for the puff pastry. We're just gonna cut it in about 5-inch steaks. So because these are portioning, we're portioning these for a tasting menu. If you were to do a traditional beef Wellington, you would have a filet. Filet mignon is pretty traditional. It's really lean, and a lot of people will sear it really well, and that kind of traps it in, kind of seals the outside. It allows for not a lot of liquid to come out. But for us, we're going to cut it in smaller portions because of the size of the Wellingtons we're going to use. We trim off all of the excess fat. Again, we're going to save that for later use for rendering. And that's great for a lot of different things. When we have excess meat that comes off of a Wellington, especially for a tasting menu, we will use it for a beef tartare that's maybe a canapé, or we'll save it for an event that we have that we'll use for different canapés. And that's how we mitigate waste in something like this, especially with dry aging. You lose about 30% of the cut when you dry age, so it's really important for us that we try to find a way to make up that 30%, and that means really being efficient with how we use all of the trim. So always keeping that in mind. The way we cut this beef too is you always want to look for the way the grain runs. In the end, when it's all said and done, when it's all baked, if we want to be cutting against the grain. So the way we portion these in cubes, we'll look at the way the grain is running. It's running this way. So if we're going to be portioning the beef this way, we want to turn it this way, and this is how we'll start with the portion. So being mindful about every step of this process. And then we're going to stuff it. So we have short rib from the same farm, so it's Masami Ranch. They grow cattle just 2 hours north of us, so really just tying it into Sonoma. This short rib, we get it in whole. We sous vide it for 72 hours. First, we break it down. We clean off any of the sinew, any additional fat. We sear it really hard, salt it. Afterwards, what we want to do with with that is that as soon as you start to salt meat, all the water content comes out, and it limits the amount of sear that you get, that Maillard reaction. So we like to sear it really hard, season it afterwards, and then we put it in a sous vide, 72 degrees for about 72 hours. So a really long time. It's just really it falls apart. It's a really beautiful piece of meat after it's done. The short rib is portioned to about the size of this beef. Because there's so much fat in that short rib, we want to freeze it to harden it up so that when we push it through, it doesn't fall apart. We'll wrap the short rib in Swiss chard. We get this from our farm. Try to pick it close to the process as possible. And with this, we'll want to remove the rib. So you can see it goes kind of all the way up. It starts to get pretty tender right around here towards the top. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of clean that rib right off. These are great if you want to save them for pickling, any additional processes. So you have it here. We'll portion it all the way down. We want the Swiss chard in long strips because we're gonna make this roulade. You have to roll it. It doesn't overlap too much, but we do want it to close the whole entire thing. Afterwards, we'll blanch them for about 15 seconds in highly salted water. That'll be the wrapper for the roulade. So this is the Swiss chard after we've blanched it. With Wellingtons, you want to really mitigate the amount of moisture content, or else your dough will be really soggy. So for this, we blanch it, we chill it in ice water, and then we dry it off really well. Just on a paper towel is fine. So we have this frozen piece of short rib. We have onion ash here. So we take onions, we slice them up really thin, we dry them overnight in a really low oven until they're black, and then we blend them into a powder. We're gonna roll the short rib in that. So this is for a couple different reasons. We like the flavor of it. We like to incorporate some of that trim that we have from the farm. And additionally, once we cut into it, you can see the different layers of Swiss chard, of the onion ash, and of the short rib. So once we have that nice coating, the whole thing is covered. Depending on the size of your blanched Swiss chard, we will use 2 pieces if they're really skinny, or one large piece, just enough to be able to wrap the whole thing completely. So when we're doing this, we're putting it in, and then we're starting to roll. So it's roulades inside of roulades. So you're taking the short rib, you're inside the Swiss chard, and then you're just rolling it forward. And you'll see you have excess on the edges, and you can just tuck those in. And once you get to about the point where you've double rolled it, so it's double layered, anything additional you can just trim off. And from here, I'll just kind of squeeze it with my hands to make sure it's nice and even, nice and round. So now once we have the short rib rolled in the Swiss chard, we're gonna measure it up to the beef again. So you can see there's a little bit of overlap. So we're just gonna trim the edges to make sure that it fits in. And if there's a little bit sticking out of the beef, it's okay. Once we roll it and trim it, we're gonna trim the ends off once the beef Wellington is baked anyway. So we'll start there. It's about the size of it. And the next step is stuffing the short rib inside of the beef. So we'll make a small incision with a boning knife or any thin knife we like to use. And we'll basically make an X through that, so that way we have an entry point. And we'll create a hole before we stuff it in, so that it fits in and we're not kind of just shredding the meat as it goes in. So with the beef, we want to make that X through here. We want it to be right in the center. So we want to make sure that when we go through on this side, that it comes out on the other side the same direction, or else you're going to have a diagonal stuff. We just wanted that X in the middle. So from here, we've made that incision, and we're just gonna, for me, I use my pinky. You can kind of use anything that's that size to just push, kind of just clear the way and stretch out the meat a little bit from that incision that we made. It's about the size of your short rib. So really I've seen knife steels been used before. Anything that's that size. So from here, once we have that hole, we're gonna stuff the short rib through. If you find that it's thawing out as you're wrapping it, as you're portioning the beef, you can stick it back in a blast chiller or a freezer until it really hardens. That's gonna be the crucial point, because when you stuff it through, you want to really make sure that this is hard, or else it's going to be really challenging. So at this point, we'll stick it through, kind of twisting as you go, so that you're continuing to push it through without resistance. So at this point, you can kind of see it coming out the other side. So once it's all the way through, you can see it's sticking out on the side. That's okay. Once we sear it, once this thaws out and it kind of becomes the same temperature, it'll all kind of blend together well. And so at this point, we'll just shape it around that, making sure it's really tight and snug. And that any folds while you're stuffing it, any folds that kind of go with the short rib will bounce right back out. So at this point, we're gonna get ready to sear it. Okay, so for this next part, we're gonna sear it. We like to use a cast iron pan, get it really hot, really clean. We're thinning the density of the meat, so the outsides are a little bit thinner. So it's really important that we sear it really quickly. So we get it really hot. We use some neutral oil, 90-10, call it 90% rice bran, 10% olive oil, a nice clean flavor. So nice sear on all sides. We use a little bit less oil than you normally would. It is Wagyu, so some fat will come off and help with the sear. So final side, once that's done searing, for us, we stick it in the blast chiller. It kind of cuts off the cooking immediately. If you don't have a blast chiller, you can just put it in a freezer. That should help stop the cooking. And then we'll move on to making the duxelles. Okay, next we're gonna make the duxelles. That goes inside of the roulade of the Wellington. We have matsutake mushrooms. These are pine mushrooms. They grow under pine trees. We're right in the season, so it's great to mix with that beef. We kind of showcase those because they grow near the farm that the beef is raised. So we'll grill the mushrooms. We'll chop those up pretty finely. We'll sweat them with shallots and garlic and thyme, a little white wine. We'll sweat them out until pretty much all the moisture is gone, and we're just left with those mushrooms and that almost a paste. So the first step in this is we're gonna grill the matsutake mushrooms. At the restaurant with our hearth, we use almond wood. California is the largest producer of almonds in the world. And so there's a lot of trees that are left over that when they stop fruiting, they cut them down and we use it for firewood. So the first step, we're just gonna grill these over the fire really lightly until they get a nice browning, a touch of char. The first step in grilling, we wanna wait till the wood turns into coals. We'll put it in this basket and then we'll shake off all of the ash. You don't want any of that ash because it all transfers onto the vegetables. We'll put the grill grate on. We'll fan these coals until they get red hot. I think a lot of people will just put the coals in, put the grate on, and start grilling. But the heat of the grate is really what's important. So from here, we have our matsutake mushrooms. They've been sous vide in butter till they're tender. Once they're tender, we take them out, we dry them off, and we brush them just with a little bit of butter. And we're just gonna put them on the grill grate. So we've cut the mushrooms in half. We're just gonna put them that cut side down so they get more surface area on top of the coals. We cover the area where the coals are around the basket. You don't wanna put it outside of the corners where the coals are limited to. And as it warms up, the coals start to die down a touch, and then we just start fanning it. And that brings the heat right back up. Unlike cooking on a stove, there's no knob that you can just turn the heat down, up and down. So with this, the fan kind of is our knob. So we're gently fanning the coals. This allows that any additional ash, this gently fans it off. So once they get a little bit of color on that face side, we're gonna start flipping them to get the other side. Turn them over as they get that light brown color on them. If it's not on the whole thing, it's okay. What we're doing is we're drawing out some of the sugars in the mushrooms while evaporating any moisture that's left over in the mushrooms themselves. So kind of a two-purpose process. Flavors from the grill, flavors from the coal, while also drawing out any moisture that's left in there. So now that the mushrooms are done grilling, before we chop them, we'll start to sweat the other aromatics. So we have garlic, we have shallots, we have thyme, we have white wine that we'll deglaze with once everything's sweated out. So we'll start with just a little bit of blended oil to cover the bottom of the pan to start sweating it. We start with the garlic. And because we've grilled the mushrooms, you know, traditionally I think you would just sweat these until they're translucent, not too much color. For us, we're gonna get a little bit of color on the garlic before we add the shallot. All right, so the garlic is getting toasted. You can kind of smell it. So once we get to this point where the garlic is translucent, it's toasted, we're gonna add the shallots. So we like to do this in a two-step process. Sometimes we'll make recipes where we just add all the alliums in at once and we'll sweat those together. And that's when we're cooking them to the same consistency. So if we're toasting garlic, we'll do that first. If we're sweating shallots and garlic together, we'll just, and they're gonna be the same consistency, same translucency, we'll just add them together. So for this, we've added the garlic first, we've toasted it, and now we're gonna sweat the shallots out just until they're translucent. So some of the moisture content in the shallots is starting to cool the pan down, and that's good because we're gonna turn this down a touch and just let it coast for a couple of minutes while we cut the mushrooms. We're gonna start by just cutting them in half and then just really thinly shaving them. And don't worry too much whether they're perfectly sliced. We're gonna go back through them with our knife once everything is mixed. It's a little bit easier to cut all of it together. If you have these big chunks and you're doing it at the end and things are different consistency, you're gonna end up chopping some of it too fine and some of it's gonna be too much, and you're gonna tend to overwork it. We want it to be somewhat of a paste, but the more you chop it, the more inconsistency you can potentially have towards the end. All right, so once we have our mushrooms sliced really thin, we're gonna add them in with the shallots that have been cooking really low. At this point, they're all translucent. The garlic is toasted, the shallots are translucent. So we're gonna add the mushrooms in and just, again, cook those down really slowly. We're gonna turn this up a little bit higher. Stirring pretty frequently so that we don't get too much more color on this. And once we get to that point where it's gonna be so hot that it's potentially gonna toast all of this, then we're gonna deglaze with the wine. You can hear the immediate sizzle of that white wine, and that's what we're looking for as we reduce this all down. At this point, we're gonna add the aromatics. So we didn't before because we don't want the oil to essentially fry them. So now that we have liquid in here, we're gonna add the thyme and just let that steep into the wine as it's reducing. At this point, I don't like to stir it too much because we just want, there's enough surface area that the liquid's just gonna reduce, that we're not gonna get any more color. You kind of just let it do its thing until all of it's evaporated, which then, once it starts to be evaporated, we'll take the thyme out, we'll let it continue to evaporate, we'll stir it some more, and then we're ready to chop it. This is the duxelles after we've sweat it, cooled it down. For us, we put it in a Robocoo until it's this fine paste. You want to make sure that all of the liquid has been evaporated. You can make this a day ahead of time, or you can use it the day of. Just make sure it's cooled down. And then from this point, we'll use it to coat the Wellington before we wrap it. All right, so this is the part where we'll brush with the mustard and roll it with the duxelles. So everything is cold, the beef is chilled. This is a shiro miso, so white miso, and Dijon mustard, equal parts. And we'll just lightly brush that onto the beef. Just a thin layer. This is for flavor, but it's also gonna help that duxelles stick to the beef. So the next step, I'll do this by hand. You have the duxelles, over a tray. We'll add a thin layer. You want to get the seared sides of the beef, not the exposed side where the short rib is. And I'll tap it out. If you put a good chunk on there, you can tap it out with your finger and just keep shaping it with your hand. So once we have that thin layer on, then we'll roll it in the Swiss chard. So kind of the same concept as the short rib. It's the same thing. It's blanched in that salted water for about 15 seconds. Really dry. And this will be a little bit longer than the short rib one. So we'll place it in the center of the Swiss chard. And we'll just roll it really tightly. As we get to the center, when you have those flaps of the excess Swiss chard, you'll tuck it in again, just like the short rib. Tuck it in as you go so that it's all even and flat. You can see it's closed on both sides, all sides. From this point, we'll go right into the puff pastry. We like to do 2 layers of the puff pastry. It's very thin. Typically, when you get puff pastry, it's around a ½ inch. We'll go down even further, a ¼ inch. Because the beef has less density, we've stuffed it with the short rib. We really want to cook the puff pastry fairly quickly, so it's quite thin. The first step in the 2 layers is we're going to make a lattice shape. Brush it pretty liberally with all-purpose flour. And this is right out of the refrigerator, so we store it in the freezer. For this application, we'll put it into the refrigerator, just so it's a little bit easier to work with. So this lattice tool, we'll start about 3/4 of the way down, having our palm on the end. So when it goes in, we have something to grab onto so it doesn't stick. And with quite a bit of pressure, you'll just slowly work that wheel centered. From here, we'll just cut off that piece that we hung onto while we did this. And then towards the end, we'll cut this off as well. It makes it a touch easier to open when both sides are cut and exposed. And then from here, you can see all the cuts are made. We'll just pull it open gently. If you find that the wheel, maybe there wasn't enough pressure, maybe it got stuck at all. If you find that's the case, just gently pull it open. You can always go back through with your knife and just open some of these incisions up really gently. But for the most part, you should be able to just open this right up. So we'll set this aside. This will be the first layer. So we'll just brush the outside of this. The inside, we don't want to brush it too much because the beef is going to go in there. We don't want any uncooked flour in there. So the beef goes in the center. And we cut it. You want to have some overhang on either side. You can see there will be some overhang, and that's to seal the edges. So we start wrapping it. And unlike the Swiss chard where we were folding it in before, we're going to leave those flaps open because we will close them up at the end. So a slight overlap here at the end, that's okay. So at this point, we're here, we have both ends open. And this is where we're just going to tuck all of the bottom in like that on both sides. And then here we're going to stretch the top over those flaps. And just seal it right on the bottom. And then reshape it. so that it's nice and tight for when we add the lattice on. You really want it to stick. If it doesn't stick because there's flour, if it's a little too cold, just keep working it. Just keep pressing. Just keep shaping. All right, so once we have that wrap, the initial one, it's shaped. It feels nice and tight. You can see the edges are sealed. Then we're gonna work the lattice part. We're gonna add the lattice. So we drape it over the top, flip it over gently. You want to make sure that the bottom lines up, not too much overlap. And then to seal the edges, we're just bringing it all in the center. So unlike the last one where we took the top and folded it over, this part we're just going to press it in the center. And as you go, you want to continue to shape it. So if there's any excess, if it's not sticking, just continue to shape it. Same thing with this side. Press it in the center. This can often be pretty intimidating because, you know, you're working with the dough. Sometimes it doesn't always do what you want it to do, but as you shape it, as long as you're not stretching the dough out too much, if you stretch it, it becomes thinner, it bakes unevenly. So if you're just pressing it to the point where it's to the point that it's sticking together, that's quite all right. So at this point, we're gonna brush it with egg wash. So simply just blended yolks, and that's gonna help give that color when we bake it. So just a really thin layer. So I'll tap it on so that we're not pulling and stretching the dough as we go. And if the dough is coming up with the brush, just kind of hold it as you go. As long as it's not coming too out of place, you're good. So at this point, we'll put in our blast chiller for about 20 to 30 minutes till the dough gets hard, but also the beef inside, we want it to chill down quite a bit so that it doesn't overcook in the baking process. We'll bake it at 390 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 299 Celsius. We'll invert a pan like this in the oven, preheat it for another 20 minutes or so that when we put it in the oven, the bottom of the Wellington doesn't become soggy. It starts to crisp up immediately. We'll put it in the oven for about 19 to 20 minutes until it gets really crispy on the outside. All right, so this is after we've baked it. We baked it for about 20 minutes, rested it for about 10. And so we're gonna serve half of this per plate, and we're just gonna cut it right down the middle. All right, so now that we've portioned it, we're just gonna put it right on the plate. It's rested. So for us, we put it off center, and then we finish the plate with a jus. So this is a beef jus. We make chicken stock, we reduce that down, we make a veal demi, combine them, and then steep them with matsutake trim. So that was the mushrooms that we use that are left over from making the duxelles. We don't want to put too much sauce on it. We want to make sure that the crust is dry. Here we have our interpretation of beef Wellington. So it's the Masami Ranch Wagyu, that domestic Wagyu. You have this short rib from the same beef, Swiss chard, and that onion ash, and then a jus made with bones, steeped with matsutake trim.